We're all very human and fallible, and yet we live in a society that rewards pretending we're not fallible, or the range of acceptable fallibility is narrow.
We are constantly comparing our insides to other people's outsides and feeling inadequate and guilty, even ashamed.
Trying to blend in means parts of ourselves must disappear, and we must then live in fear that we will be found out.
Here, together, we will create a space where we can laugh, cry, and carry our suffering and hurts lightly.
In the service of being deeply human.
This is Life's Dirty Little Secrets.
Welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets. I'm Emma Waddington.
And I'm Chris McCurry. And today we are privileged to have with us as our guest, Dr. Paula Freedman Diamond. She's a licensed clinical psychologist, certified intuitive eating counselor, and the owner and clinical director of Humankind Psychological Services. Great name. Where she specializes in treating anxiety, perfectionism, and eating disorders. And she is the author of the recently published Toxic Striving: Why Hustle and Wellness Culture Are Leaving Us Anxious, Stressed, and Burned Out, and How to Break Free. And that's from New Harbinger Publications, and we'll have a link to that and other resources in our show notes. So welcome, Paula. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So toxic striving, can you help define that a little bit, and how does that present itself?
Yeah, I guess I had the experience first at a personal level, then at a professional level, then started a book about it, and then kind of came up with the language to explain the experience. But basically what I noticed is that there's this I guess personality style that is quite common, where someone maybe gravitates toward high achieving, wants very much to do a good job at everything they do. Maybe this sort of tendency towards perfectionism, and it can show up in any number of ways, but often it kind of crosses the line from I'm striving towards goals that are important to me. I'm striving towards things because I'm proud of myself when I accomplish them, or it enhances my life when I accomplish them, into if I'm not striving for something, if I'm not achieving all the time, if I'm not maximizing my productivity in every single moment that I'm alive, I am a failure, or I'm not worthy of love or belonging or any of the rewarding things in life. And I work primarily with anxiety, perfectionism, and eating disorders. And on the surface, you might think of those as kind of, I guess, separate buckets of diagnostic. I mean, they are separate diagnostic criteria and symptoms and presentations. But what I've found is that personality is often kind of a through line, regardless of how someone's tendency towards this constant chasing of the next accolade or chasing of the next goal and reward, regardless of how it manifests, whether it's through I have to have this perfectly curated home that's decorated in a way that looks great on Instagram, or dress myself a certain way, or have a certain body and aesthetic, or have a certain job title or certain salary, or be a certain type of parent. Regardless of how it shows up, it often the process behind it is often the same, and it can be toxic. It can cause a lot of suffering.
So it sounds like trying to fill some sort of void or escape from boredom. I mean, I guess there could be many different manifestations of it.
Right. And fill a void is a good way of putting it, because it never is quite satisfied. There's sort of this internal pressure and external pressure that come together to make you feel like no matter what you do, you're never really worthy, or you never really deserve more than a moment's rest or a moment's recognition or validation of what it is you worked so hard for, before it's all right, well, what's next? Or that discredits you after you've already done it. So as soon as you achieve something, there's maybe that voice in your head that's well, it wasn't really that hard. People do that all the time. You're not really that special. So, now what are you going to do?
That sounds like stuff maybe we hear when we're young.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's true a lot of the time, that it can be kind of an internalized messaging from maybe a critical parent or teacher or coach, or even maybe if it wasn't directed at you, but you saw someone else get treated that way. That can often be where it comes from.
So you mentioned Instagram. I mean, there's certainly been a lot of debate of late about social media and to what extent it's nurturing, unhappiness. I'm sure that's exacerbated this whole issue of toxic striving, but has toxic striving always been around? I mean, is this something that, Emma and I were talking before we started about, my mother in the 50s and 60s, school teacher, raising 6 kids. I wonder if she even paused to think about her
Right.
striving and
That's an interesting question. I think maybe in some regard it's always been around that we've wanted to be accepted socially and that there have been standards set forth by whatever the dominant culture is. But I feel like to bring back to social media, there's a lot more, I guess, it's a lot more common now to work like self-development as a thing, right? And that you have to always be bettering yourself in some way. And I think of it, I mean, I think my mind goes to parenting now because I'm the mother of a newborn baby. So I'm going through that for the first time myself. And there's a lot of pressure in that world to use a certain parenting philosophy. And if you're not really careful, you're going to repeat the mistakes of the previous generations. And then you're going to screw up your kid and it'll be all your fault that they weren't talking to you. And, there's a lot of that kind of thing out there too.
it's all true.
It's all true. Well, especially psychologists, our kids are usually the ones with all the issues. But no, I mean, in any aspect of life, I feel like we've become maybe more, I don't know if it's like more navel-gazy, but there is a lot more. And I think social media plays a role in this of having to maybe like show the world how you're doing in every aspect of your life and not just live your life for yourself in the privacy of your home or your community, but it's like on display for everyone to either see what a great example you are or pick you apart.
Yeah, everything's got to be up on Pinterest for people to admire. So that's hard to escape.
Hello, listeners. I'm Emma.
And I'm Chris.
And we are so excited to share with you our latest workbook, Just in Case Sits with Anxiety, which was published by Jessica Kingsley. The workbook takes us on a journey with Justin, who's about to have his very first babysitting job. He is excited, but quickly gets hit with a wave of what ifs. What if something goes wrong? Or what if he's not good enough? In the workbook, Justin overcomes the inevitable challenges of babysitting 2 toddlers whilst learning ideas and tools to help him understand his feelings and face those fears, whilst learning to do what's most important to him, being a kind and resourceful kid. Based on acceptance and commitment therapy, it's packed with activities for kids plus helpful tips for parents. Order now on Amazon to find out how Justin learns to tackle his worries and move forward with courage.
It is. It's hard to escape. It's this messaging that's always coming in. I do think that this idea that hustle culture and wellness culture, the two facets of our dominant culture that I explored in my book, they're not newer necessarily. I mean, there's always, not always, but for many decades, there's been different iterations in our society of what's considered healthy and what practices you should be engaging in order to be an acceptable human. But they've morphed and they've transformed over time, and there are different trends. And I think maybe part of like women entering the workforce more and people being both doing kind of everything, wearing every hat, being professionals and having a family and having a social circle and having all of these different areas of life. There's also like, this just happened the other day. I was out with my husband in this kind of trendy part of town here in Chicago, and everyone there, my husband turns to me and says, everyone in this room looks like at some point they've made a video on social media about their 5 to 9 before their 9 to 5. Like everyone here is like dressed in this perfectly fashionable way and just kind of looks like they wake up at 5 a.m. and they drink their apple cider vinegar and they do all the wellness things they're supposed to do before they go crush it at their job, where they never leave an email unread. And I think that pressure is maybe somewhat newer and maybe kind of a generational phenomenon that affects, I mean, maybe everyone, but I see it a lot in my practice with millennials and people who maybe grew up at the turn of the recession in 2008 and where they were like kind of faced with, no matter what I do, I'm going to have to hustle extra hard and get a side gig in order to make ends meet. So yeah, I don't know. This is an interesting conversation to kind of speculate on where and how some of these cultural expectations developed.
We had a great conversation with a guest called Ross White, and he has a book called The Tree That Bends. And he talks about working with high achievers as well and the striving. He calls it the relentless, and he talks about how we need to relent more. And sort of looking at your book and conversations that you've been having, it really feels like anything we touch at the moment, we seem to put under this umbrella of striving. And we've had a conversation with Debbie Sorensen on parenting, the parent burnout, like everything we touch becomes outcome driven and performance related. And I've had many conversations with my parents where I've asked them if they ever question their parenting. And they'll look at me like I have two heads. Like that wasn't the thing that anybody did. There were no books. There was nothing. It just wasn't part of the narrative. Whilst I think nowadays, everything we do is under scrutiny, be it like you were talking about work and health, but also parenting, how we look after our parents, not just how we parent, but how we look after our parents, how we do anything seems to be under this gaze of, is it good enough? And it's almost like this machine has been plugged in and it just applies to everything. And how do we stop that? Ross White talks about how do we start to relent more, because it really does feel quite systemic. And I even hear it with my kids. School is much more demanding than it was when I was a kid. The tuition, I think it's the same there. I think it's the same everywhere now, that you're not meant to just hang out and play. What are you using your time for? Because you're on this, mission, right? And I don't know if it's because there are so many of us and life has become more competitive than it was when my parents were parents, but it's definitely been a shift in terms of the way we value ourselves much more on what we do than who we are.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I also noticed this idea that there are ways to optimize every aspect of your functioning. Like you said, everything we touch can turn into this, like this thing something we have to crack the code on how to do perfectly. You can't just do it for the sake of doing it, or kind of give it your best shot and say, all right, that's what I got. You have to look for the formula. And there's usually someone out there who can sell you a formula, who's happy to tell you that they have the answers to these things. And then I think we fall into the trap of looking to the outside world for all of this guidance on how do I make sure that I get 8 hours of sleep. And even that is so people optimizing their sleep, even rest has to have some sort of intentional approach to making it perfect, which the irony.
Yeah, there are 66,000 parenting books out there.
Wow.
And many of them contradicting each other.
Mm-hmm.
My mother had Benjamin Spock, and that was it. And she said the most useful thing she got out of that book was when it said, your child can reach farther than you think they can.
I like that.
Yeah.
Maybe that speaks to how there was a time where people trusted themselves a little bit more, or trusted that their children and their loved ones could handle life's hardships, and we didn't have to go do every tiny little thing that not every tiny little thing we did was going to have this lasting, monumental, horrible impact on our future. And I don't know, I think we've progressed in some ways too. I think it's useful to self-reflect and to ask yourself, are there things I could be maybe doing better, more effectively? Is the way that I'm approaching XYZ working for me, or can I learn something from someone who's done it well or read a book, or it's not to say like not to seek any sort of self improvement. But yeah, I think we do cross the line quite easily into I know nothing. I need to like find the perfect hack to make sure that I can do this right at every turn.
Yeah, as if we know.
Right. As if that's possible.
Well, and there are too many variables. I mean, we think our parenting is the only thing that's going to bend the arc of our child's development, when so many other things will, particularly as they get older.
Well, and I think some of it is that when it comes to the toxic striving, at least, a combination of nature and nurture. I think a lot about how did I get this way? Like, how did I become so hard on myself as a child about everything I did? And I can. I have some working hypotheses about some of the people-pleasing tendencies I developed and why it was hard for me to ever tolerate someone being upset with me and that sort of thing. But in terms of achievement, getting straight A's or getting certain grades and all of that, I kind of put that on myself. Like my parents really were not. They were proud of me if I got a good grade in school, but they never, like, it wasn't this expectation that was explicitly stated or anything like that. And I think that I maybe am someone who likes control more than the average person. I think everyone likes control in some regard, but I do think some of us have a harder time loosening up around it. And that is where you see people who struggle with anxiety and perfectionism and maybe eating disorders or body image struggles or things that involve seeking control over our internal experiences and seeking control over things that maybe we don't have that much control over.
That's a hard thing to let go of.
Oh, yeah, really. I've been working on it for a long time.
I was just wondering, is it useful then to think about when, because you also talk about this in the book, that striving in and of itself isn't the problem. Like, we can all want to do a good job. We can all, and when I've worked with people who have very high standards, the thought of lowering standards is absolutely non-acceptable. So when we think about how do we find that place? You talked about rules. I love the piece on rules. I really think that that's really useful to touch on for our listeners. But how do we know when striving gets out of hand? Because wanting to do a good job as a parent is a good thing, or wanting to be healthy is a good thing, or do well at work.
Of course, I think there's a variety of ways you can look at it. I think like Ross White talking about just not approaching in the most rigid, like loosening up and not being quite so relentless, I think is a useful starting point, figuring out what is important to you about reaching these standards and what meaning have you attached to it? What have you decided it means about you to reach this standard at all times? Or if you don't, what does that mean about you? And I find unpacking values is a really useful way of like kind of loosening someone up around it. Is like, what do you truly care about deep down as a person? What do you want to be remembered for at the end of your life? That sort of thing can help bring you back to earth a little bit, because a lot of times we're chasing things, either we're chasing things in a way that doesn't align with our values, or we're chasing things that aren't important to us in the first place. Like the goal itself is maybe something that we think we're supposed to go after, like perhaps a certain aesthetic or body size or a certain way of eating or a certain job title or something like that. It might not really resonate with you as a thing that's going to enhance your life in any meaningful way, but yet you're spending a lot of energy and resources on it. So sometimes even make it like just questioning what it is that you're striving for can clue you in a little bit more. And is this even a worthwhile pursuit for me? And I think sometimes getting too attached to anything, even if it is something that's a worthwhile pursuit for you, right, can be really dangerous. Because again, what if it goes away, or what if you don't get there ever? Will you still have lived a life worth living. So sometimes you have to expand your sense of identity too, to go beyond that one thing, if that makes sense.
Sure. And
Yeah.
you've talked about how rules and the shoulds in one's life, that one of the warning signs is if your self-worth is suffering. Can you say more about that? How,
Yeah, I think, I guess, to go back to how do you pursue something in a way that isn't toxic? I think that's a big piece of it. Recognizing the way that you're approaching it. Is it based on rules, based on rigidity, or is it rooted in compassion? Because you can encourage yourself to move towards maybe a behavior change or move towards something that matters to you without having to then, without beating yourself up if it doesn't go as planned, or if you miss a day on your new habit or whatever it is. So I like to encourage people to look at the language that their inner voice is using with them. Is it command language? I should, I have to, I need to, I can't. That's usually a red flag that you're dealing with one of those rules. And how can you, I guess, kind of edit the way that you speak to yourself, or at least recognize that that's just one voice, and that's that inner critic voice, rather than the be all end all truth with a capital T that's guiding you. And notice, how do you feel about yourself when you listen to those types of phrases versus when you maybe encourage yourself in a different way, or speak to yourself in a different way, or look at the situation with a little bit more flexibility and openness to being a human being who is not perfect and who does have days where your energy just naturally ebbs and flows. I think that's something we find hard to accept, maybe because of the advent of technology, and everything seems like it can be hacked and programmed. I almost think we've started to view ourselves as computers or robots, that if I just program myself correctly at every moment of the day, I'll be optimized and able to focus on my emails and, make sure that every workout I do is the best workout I've ever had. And if I'm waking up during the night, it must be because I didn't go to bed at the perfect time or drink the right amount of water, or there's just so much counting and tracking and measuring that we're kind of, I guess, often led to believe, if we just find the right way to track it all and to program ourselves, that we aren't going to have those natural ebbs and flows that come with being alive. But if we can remind ourselves we're human, and attention goes through natural ups and downs throughout the day or throughout different times in your life, and energy goes through different ups and downs throughout the day and the week and your life, and your priorities are going to shift at different phases of your life. If we can remember that, I think it can go a long way in introducing that flexibility to let ourselves not be these perfectly optimized robots, I guess. What do you think?
So you're talking about when that stuff shows up in your head, to sort of hold it lightly.
Exactly. Yeah. So some cognitive diffusion can be really useful there, recognizing this is just a thought. This is just words in my brain. It doesn't have to be this mandate that I follow. And what am I afraid of happening if I don't follow it? I think that could be a useful question too.
Right. In ACT, we have as you know, we have a great metaphor about passengers on the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And we're driving our bus, but a lot of the passengers have some things to say about our driving. And some of that might be good information, and some of that might not be. And so being able to hold that lightly is important.
Right. To take it with curiosity. Is there something useful in this message? And maybe there is, and it could be framed in a different way that's kinder, or maybe there really isn't, and it's just kind of nonsense that I've been fed from society that I've internalized and that I've come to cling to as this ticket to belongingness that really just isn't true.
Yeah, or there's a connection between that thought and some value that we have.
Yeah.
Although that thought is coming to us in a way that's perhaps a bit harsh or rigid, but it's linked to something that we genuinely care about.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point too, that sometimes messenger or the delivery style is cruel, but the underlying message, the intention of it is maybe values driven. And so then can you how do you like decode it a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. Reframe it.
Absolutely.
And I guess the difference between it being values driven versus rule based, right? If I have a rule, I have to get healthy no matter what, because I want to be a strong grandmother. And that starts now with what I eat, how I move my body, how I sleep. That being a healthy grandmother could be part of my value around caring for those I love. I guess where it changes, so it can look like it's values driven because it looks like it's moving us in that direction. But the difference with a rule is the inflexibility and the rigidity around it. Like I have to do this no matter what. Like I have to do my, whatever it is, take my green juice or my, 8 hours sleep. And then the consequence when we don't follow that rule is this sort of distress and disappointment. And the beauty of having it more values guided is that we can be more flexible. Maybe we didn't get the juice in and because we slept in or whatever it might be. And we worked on our well-being by sleeping in versus getting up early and having our juice, that there's a little more softness in how we treat ourselves. I think that's, for me, is useful.
I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it too, is softness and maybe like zooming out to recognize that values themselves are subjective. So what does health mean to you? It's got a multifaceted, there's so many layers to health and to your definition of health that can also be different at different moments in time. So there's not one universally correct way to honor your health or to pursue health. So if you're doing it in this rigid way and it's creating some suffering or it's creating some, you're really like stuck in this like kind of critical loop where it's never good enough, how can you zoom out and look at the thing that you're pursuing in a different light and think about if maybe, is it even healthy to pursue health in a way that's causing you stress? Because that affects your health too. So
Yeah, the irony.
yeah. And the idea that you have full control over these things too. Because you can do things to maybe pursue health or that align with your definition of health, and you still might have outcomes that you don't want. You still might get sick. You still might age.
Oh, yeah.
We'll all age, so there's no controlling that. But
I'm doing my best.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know. I've lost a couple of friends to illnesses that they never saw coming, healthy
Wow.
individuals doing everything right. And but, I think that kind of gets us into what you've said, Paula, about making room for context.
Mm-hmm.
Because some days you're just not going to get the 8 hours of sleep for a variety of reasons. Some days as a parent, we all just got back from a vacation. Our flight was 2 hours late arriving. We're just not going to bother with like brushing our teeth tonight. And we're all just all going to go to bed in our clothes and not worry about like the pajamas and the whole thing. I'll read you a story, but it's going to be one story and we're all going to bed because we're all tired or we're all sick or whatever it may be. So being able to adjust to that, can you say a little bit more about that in terms of your work with some of these high striving people?
Yeah, I think it goes back to this idea that if I'm doing things right, if I've found the right hack or formula or programming, I suppose, I will never have a day where I have to deviate from those things. And to your point, it's all, our context is always changing. And there are times where you're not going to be able to, or where it might cause more harm than good to pursue the thing that you've deemed important in that time in your life, maybe, to accept that. I mean, I just, again, what I know, I'm coming back to having a baby because, again, it's like the center of my life right now. But
It should be.
yeah, I suppose that's true. I'm like, right, I don't need to
Go with it.
use this disclaimer there. But I got really caught up in like the sleep thing, like trying to make sure, how do I make sure that I'm not too sleep deprived and that my baby starts sleeping more and trying to control what she's doing and when she's napping. And I mean, she was too little for any of that. Like, and getting really, I mean, I was getting very anxious when night would approach of like, how much sleep am I going to get tonight? And to just shift to this mindset of, this is a chapter in my life where I'm just going to be tired and I'm just probably not going to get the best quality sleep and the number of hours that I typically need to feel rested. And I'm just not going to be rested for this chapter. And it's a chapter of my life. The world will still turn, and like being able to take that extra layer off of it makes a huge difference, I think. Even if the experience itself is still unpleasant, being able to not add this pressure of like, how do I fix it? If it's not going the way I want it to, it must be because I'm doing something wrong or I haven't found the right solution. I think that that comes back to like practicing acceptance really goes a long way in some of these things. So when I'm working with someone who is really hard on themselves over whatever it might be, maybe I'm just not as coherent as I want to be at work today. Maybe I just, not every time I get up to do a presentation is a time that I sound super eloquent and find all of the right words effortlessly. And that's okay. Like I don't have to like that. I can find that that's kind of an icky feeling inside when I don't get up there and feel like I totally crushed it, but I can survive that feeling. So also building a lot of distress tolerance and being able to cope with the discomfort that comes with being imperfect, basically.
Yeah. And feeling imperfect, right? Feeling some of those feelings like tiredness or whatever it might be physically happening, pain, discomfort, that it is hard. I think another conversation we had with Jill Stoddart, and she said it really is a muscle getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's a muscle we need to keep working at. And some of us have a really small muscle. And she, yeah, and it kind of sounds like that's what you're talking to, that we need to keep. And she talks about asking her clients to regularly put themselves in situations where they just feel uncomfortable, because it's something that takes practice. And because life is unpredictable and things happen which you can't control, we get better at surfing those waves and making room for the tiredness and making room for the thoughts that they don't like me or they think that I'm an idiot, whatever it might be that is showing up for you. I do think it takes practice.
I think so too. And I think it can get a little bit, maybe not easier, but more accessible with practice too, that tolerance. And it comes back to like what you resist persists, which I know in the ACT world, we're all really well versed in this idea that like the more you don't want to have that experience, the more that experience kind of controls you and takes over your life. So the more afraid I am of making a mistake or stumbling on my words or not being the perfect parent or not eating the way I think I'm supposed to eat or whatever it might be, the more that consumes you, the more that takes up your inner resources. And the bigger of a deal it feels if you have those natural ebbs and flows. But if you can kind of build the tolerance and the acceptance of that experience that you don't enjoy necessarily, but that is just part of being alive, it makes it a little bit easier to manage because it's inevitable that you're going to.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. It's not that we don't have standards and we don't have things that we're striving toward or outcomes that we'd like to see, but it's holding it lightly and also paying attention to the feedback that the world is giving us. Noticing, did my engaging, and when I think of tolerance, I think of an engineering definition of the optimal distance between two moving parts. And so I think of tolerance. When do we lean in and when do we hang back? Particularly in parenting, when do I lean in, with my child? When do I lean back? And a lot of my most egregious parenting mistakes have been when I leaned in when I should have leaned back, and leaned back when I should have leaned in. So, but getting a sense of that is, how did that work? Okay, I can remember that next time this situation comes up. So it's not just a free for all, but it's paying attention to the contingencies.
And I think what you're mentioning is taking a curious approach to it versus
Mhm.
a critical approach.
Exactly.
Oh my
Very
God,
well
I
said.
screwed up. I'm the worst. I'm terrible. And now I'm going to beat myself up over it versus, oh, okay, that didn't go how I hoped. What was going on? How can I maybe learn from this and do it differently in the future? It's a lot more effective, I think, than the beating up approach. You can't really shame yourself into growth, at least in my experience. So
I've tried. I've tried.
yeah, I think we've all tried.
It's,
And also, I liked what you were saying too about like feedback from the outside world, because a lot of times with my clients, particularly who have these high standards for themselves, the the things that they're beating themselves up over are not really things that, like, if someone that they love didn't, you know, do an amazing job on their work presentation or whatever, like, you'd still love them. Like, the things that make us feel connected to those around us are often not the things that we're putting pressure on ourselves to strive for. And if you are, then maybe it's a chance to either set some boundaries in that relationship or reevaluate your closeness with someone. If the only reason that they want you in their life is because you look a certain way or because you're like working out every day or whatever it is that you're pressuring yourself to do, then is that a true, meaningful, authentic connection? So, I mean, thinking about that piece of it too, like how do these people I care about perceive me? What do they love about me? And what makes them want me around? Is it this arbitrary stuff I'm chasing? And I say arbitrary because a lot of times it is. Or is it just that I show up and that I'm like, my values are the things that they appreciate about me?
It just reminded me of the Harvard Adult Development Study where they did it's an ongoing study that's been running for 75 years. And what they have found is that it's not your career, it's not how much money you have, it's not how much you've raised and your status. It really is the quality of your connections. It's not even the quantity, it's the quality of connections. And we hear that so often, that what it is, it's our relationships and our friendships and how we show up to people and how people show up for us that ultimately will matter at the end of the day. But we can't help it. Humans have carried this machinery on their shoulders that creates these rules. And as soon as language gets hold of something, it kind of ruins it if we're not careful. Like, it's almost like we know this. We know that hanging out with my friend is more important than whether she'll see the cleanest house. We still fall into the trap of looking in the corner and going, oh no, I didn't move that tissue box, or the clothes are sort of out in the window, and we feel our body tightening and the shame showing up. And so we know it in our bones, I think. It's just so hard when we often get stuck in the thinking that we inevitably all have, and life gets really tight. And I think that's why I quite like the idea of it being a regular practice, that it's very validating to me to have lots of company in the world of others who have the same pesky critical thoughts and the same relentlessness, and to be reminded that we're all in the same suit. That's why I love the ACT community. It's like, this is just what humans do. Humans take something and make a rule about it and then get really stuck in running the show on the rule. And that's what we do, because it's functioned in many ways to keep us alive and safe. It just doesn't function so well when we're trying to control the uncontrollables, such as how we feel, how we look, how people sort of perceive us. That's where we get stuck.
I think it's so true. And we know on like you said, that kind of innate level that we can't truly connect and have any depth in our relationships if we're so focused on performance and how we're being perceived and kind of in our own heads about these things. Is my house, oh, it's a mess, or they're judging me, or all of those kind of insecurities make it so that we can't really just like relate and be present with the person we're with. And yet that's all we want, is to feel connected and belonging. And we kind of get it. We get in our own way. These strategies can backfire, these control efforts.
So, in the interest of time, any final thoughts?
As I was getting ready for this conversation, this is one of my first weeks being back to work, and my brain does not feel like it's functioning the way that I was used to it before having a baby. And I found myself going down these same rabbit holes that we're talking about, this sort of like, well, I'm not going to be able to get on there and speak in the way that I want to speak in order to sound intelligent and in order to be perceived as someone who deserves to have written a book on this topic and blah, 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 blah. And then I had to kind of stop myself and be like, all right, yeah, you're not really feeling your sharpest. And that's just part of being alive. And that's where you are today. And if people don't like it, like, that's okay. And they might not. And I guess a final thought would be that this really is such a pitfall of being a human, and that there's no cure necessarily, but that like in toxic striving, I blended intuitive eating, which I didn't really talk too much about today, but I blended that framework with ACT because they're both so much about taking what we've sort of given to the outside world and making it more of an inside job again. So taking this, instead of focusing all of the time on like, what's going to earn me approval, what's the right thing to do according to these set of standards, to come inward and use the wisdom of your own body and your values to guide you in how you want to behave. And authenticity is a value of mine. So when I come back, when I'm so afraid of stumbling on my words, and I mean, I feel that I did today, and but to be able to say like, I showed up as me, and this is the state I'm in right now, and that matters too. So I think to encourage people to remember that this being alive thing is not really compatible with like hacking your life into, like, hacking your day into this like optimized, like this thing that you can kind of set and forget. And if you just follow the formula, you're never going to have to feel any discomfort or stumble in any way, because we're all just going to do it forever.
Wonderful. So thank you so much. This has been marvelous, and really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Life's Dirty Little Secrets podcast.
If you have any feedback for us or secrets for future episodes, you can email us at lifesdirtylittlesecretspodcast@gmail.com.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Life's Dirty Little Secrets, or on Facebook at Life's Dirty Little Secrets Podcast.
We invite you to follow, rate, and review us on wherever you listen to this podcast. It is the best way to get our podcast out in front of new listeners.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more.
See you then.